Have you ever thought about how a system of justice actually breaks? We're not talking about a big, noisy explosion. We're talking about something much quieter. Today, we're doing a forensic deep dive into how these systems can fail, not with a bang, but with a slow, silent collapse from the inside.
You know, we all have this image in our heads of how a system fails, right? It's always some huge dramatic event, a massive scandal, a corrupt official getting caught on tape. But what if the real threat is something you can't even see? What if a system can be rotting away from the inside, while everything on the surface looks totally normal? That's the question we're digging into.
Okay, so to really get to the bottom of this, we first have to kind of shift our thinking about what the rule of law even is. It's not just some nice idea or a lofty goal we talk about. It's a job, a profession, with daily tasks, professional standards, and very real consequences.
And this right here really shows you the split. On one side, you've got the aspiration, the big ideal of justice that we all believe in. But on the other side, you've got the profession. This is the day in, day out grind, the actual work being done by real people who are supposed to be following a strict set of rules and disciplines.
And that's really the heart of it. Justice isn't some force of nature that just happens. It's the end product of trained people doing their jobs with incredible care, with restraint, and with a real sense of proportion. And that is especially true when they have the power to do something as serious as take away a person's freedom. It's all about the process, not just the final result.
Wow. This quote right here, it really hits you, doesn't it? It's telling us that the biggest danger to a justice system isn't some dramatic open defiance. No, the real danger is much quieter. It's the slow creep of neglect, where the very professional standards meant to hold everything together are just ignored.
So how does this actually happen? How does this professional neglect take root? Well, it's not a single event. It's a process, a series of steps. The source material calls it a trajectory of error, and it shows exactly how one small problem can snowball into a massive system-wide failure.
And here it is, the playbook for a quiet collapse. It all kicks off with something called the origin event. From there, instead of looking into what happened, the system just goes into denial. That denial slams the correction window shut, making it impossible to fix the problem. And once that window is closed, escalation isn't just a possibility. It's pretty much guaranteed.
What's really scary is that these huge failures don't start with some big, obvious crisis. They start with something small, something technical, something that seems ordinary. The key moment, the fork in the road, is when the system has to choose. Do we protect ourselves, or do we find out what really happened? And the second it chooses to protect itself, that's it. The whole trajectory of error is set in motion.
And once that initial misstep is just accepted, it's like it has its own gravity. The system starts to build around that first mistake. Every decision that comes after it tends to reinforce the error, not correct it. It gets harder and harder to go back and admit that something went wrong right at the start. Now this brings us to a really critical part of the whole thing, leadership. What happens when the people at the very top, the ones with the power to actually step in and fix things, do nothing? Well, their silence isn't neutral. In fact, it's one of the most powerful signals they can send.
I absolutely love this line. It's so powerful. Silence is not absence, it is posture. In a system like this, silence from the people in charge is an active choice. It's a stance. It's a deliberate decision to let things continue as they are. And that decision has huge consequences.
So who are these people? Who are the ones that are supposed to hit the brakes on this downward spiral? Well, you can think of them as the constitutional circuit breakers. You've got the Attorney General, who's basically the guardian of the rules for the executive branch, and the Chief Justice, who's in charge of making sure the judiciary stays disciplined.
So what happens when those circuit breakers don't trip? That's when you get what our source calls the ratchet effect. Think about a ratchet wrench, right? It can only click and tighten in one direction. It can't go backward. That's what silence from the top does. It allows the problem to escalate in only one direction, getting worse and worse, locking the system onto a path that's almost impossible to get off of. And really, it all comes down to this. It's so simple, but so profound. Before a leader knows about a problem, okay, maybe their silence is just ignorance. But once they've been notified, once they know something is wrong, their silence is no longer an accident, it's a decision.
All right, so now we get to the final phase of this whole process. And honestly, this part is probably the most disturbing. After the system has failed to correct itself, it does something really sinister. It stops looking at its own mistake and starts attacking the very person who tried to point it out.
Just look at how everything gets flipped on its head here. On the one hand, you have someone doing perfectly normal legal things, raising a concern, asking for information, pointing out a contradiction. But the system, which is now completely on the defensive, twists that. It reframes that totally legitimate action as an act of defiance, as malice, or as an attempt to obstruct justice.
There's actually a specific name for this tactic, and it is chilling. It's called pathologizing persistence. It's this clever little trick where the system takes a perfectly rational response, like, say, continuing to ask for an answer when you haven't gotten one, and recasts it as a sign that you're the problem. Suddenly, you're not a citizen with a valid concern, you're obsessive, you're malicious, you're dysfunctional.
And that is where things get truly dangerous. Because once you've labeled the person as the problem, you've given the system a green light to use its power against them. Punishment is no longer about justice. It becomes a tool for managing this inconvenient person who just won't shut up.
Okay, let's zoom out for a second. Why is it so important to understand this whole framework? What's the point? Well, because it's basically a blueprint. It gives us a way to spot how things go wrong, not just in the legal world, but in any big, powerful institution.
So, if you're going to take anything away from this, let it be these 4 points. First, big systems usually fail quietly, through the slow erosion of professional standards. Second, those tiny mistakes at the beginning, if they're not fixed, create a momentum that is incredibly hard to stop. Third, silence from leaders is never neutral. It's an endorsement. And finally, when an institution feels threatened, its go-to defense is often to attack the person asking the question.
And all of this leaves us with a really important, maybe even uncomfortable question to think about. If these massive failures start with something small, something ordinary, what are the origin events that are happening right now in our own institutions that we just aren't seeing? What tiny choices to choose comfort over truth are quietly setting us on a path that we can't even begin to imagine?